My pregnant wife Sarah was on trial for murder. The victim's sister Karen stood up in court and demanded the death penalty. She wanted my innocent wife executed. But Karen made one big mistake. She didn't know I was a federal judge. When I revealed my identity, everything changed. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The courtroom was packed with angry faces. I sat in the back row trying to stay calm as I watched my pregnant wife Sarah sitting at the defendant's table. Her hands were shaking as she touched her growing belly. Our baby was due in 3 months. Sarah looked so small and scared. She was only 24 years old with brown hair and kind eyes. Now she was facing murder charges for something she didn't do. The victim's sister, Karen Miller, stood up in the front row. She was a tall woman with short gray hair and angry eyes. She pointed at my wife and shouted loud enough for everyone to hear. "That woman killed my brother in cold blood," Karen yelled. "She deserves to die for what she did. I want the death penalty. Nothing less will give us justice." The crowd behind Karen nodded and shouted their agreement. "Death penalty. Death penalty," they chanted. My heart broke watching Sarah flinch at every angry word. She was innocent, but the whole town believed she was a killer. The evidence against her looked bad, and her court-appointed lawyer seemed like he didn't care. But they didn't know who I really was. And when the time was right, I would reveal my secret and save my wife and unborn child. 3 months earlier, Sarah and I had just moved to the small town of Cedar Falls. I had taken a new job, and we wanted a quiet place to raise our family. Sarah was 3 months pregnant then, and we were so happy about our first baby. Sarah worked as a nurse at the local hospital. She was loved by everyone, patients, doctors, and other nurses. She had a gift for making people feel better, even on their worst days. One night in September, Sarah was working the late shift. Around 2 a.m., a man named Robert Miller was brought in. He had been in a terrible car accident. He was badly hurt and bleeding heavily. Sarah and the other medical team worked for hours trying to save him. They gave him blood transfusions, operated on his injuries, and did everything they could. But Robert's injuries were too severe. He died at 6 a.m. His sister Karen arrived at the hospital just as Robert passed away. She was devastated and looking for someone to blame. When she saw Sarah coming out of the operating room covered in her brother's blood, Karen lost control. "You killed him," Karen screamed at Sarah. "You let my brother die." Sarah tried to explain that they had done everything possible, but Karen wouldn't listen. She was grief-stricken and needed someone to blame for her loss. "I saw you," Karen said, pointing at Sarah. "You gave him the wrong medicine. You killed him on purpose." This was completely untrue. Sarah had followed all the proper procedures. But Karen's accusation was heard by other family members who had arrived at the hospital. Soon, rumors started spreading through the small town. The local police chief, Tom Bradley, was Karen's childhood friend. When Karen went to him with her accusations, he believed her without question. Chief Bradley had never liked outsiders coming to his town, and Sarah and I were newcomers. "We need to investigate this properly," Chief Bradley announced to the media. "If this nurse killed Robert Miller, she'll pay for it." They investigated Sarah's work that night. They looked at every medicine she gave Robert, every procedure she followed. But they found no evidence of wrongdoing because there was none. However, Chief Bradley was determined to find something. He hired a corrupt medical examiner from another county, Dr. Frank Stevens, who owed him favors. Dr. Stevens reviewed the case and made a shocking claim. The nurse gave the patient a fatal dose of the wrong medication, Dr. Stevens announced. This was either gross negligence or intentional murder. This was a lie. Dr. Stevens had been paid to say this. But his false report was enough for Chief Bradley to arrest Sarah. I was at work when they came for her. I rushed home to find our house surrounded by police cars. They were leading Sarah away in handcuffs while reporters took pictures and asked terrible questions. "Mrs. Johnson, did you kill Robert Miller on purpose?" one reporter shouted. "Are you a serial killer who targets patients?" Another one yelled. Sarah was crying and trying to protect her belly as they pushed her into the police car. She looked at me with desperate eyes. "David, I didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. "Please help me." "I will," I promised her. "I'll get you out of this," but I knew it wouldn't be easy. The whole town was against her, and the evidence had been twisted to make her look guilty. The local prosecutor, District Attorney Michael Ross, saw Sarah's case as a way to advance his career. He was running for state attorney general and needed a high-profile conviction to win votes. "We will seek the death penalty for Sarah Johnson," DA Ross announced at a press conference. "She murdered an innocent man in cold blood. She used her position as a trusted nurse to commit this heinous crime. Sarah was denied bail because of the death penalty charges. She had to stay in jail while pregnant. I visited her every day, watching her get thinner and more scared as the weeks passed. David, I'm so afraid," she told me during one visit. "What if they find me guilty? What will happen to our baby?" "That won't happen," I assured her. "The truth will come out, but I was worried too." The court-appointed lawyer, Jim Peterson, was overwhelmed and inexperienced. He had never handled a death penalty case before. When I tried to hire a better lawyer, I found out that every good attorney in the area was either afraid to take the case or had been pressured not to help us. The local newspaper, owned by Karen Miller's cousin, published articles every day calling Sarah a baby-killing nurse and a monster who betrayed her patient's trust. They never mentioned that she was pregnant, or that there was no real evidence against her. The town turned completely against us. People threw eggs at our house. Someone spray-painted "killer" on our front door. I had to take time off work to protect our home and prepare for Sarah's defense. But I had a secret that could change everything. I just had to wait for the right moment to reveal it. What nobody in Cedar Falls knew was that I wasn't just David Johnson, the quiet accountant who had moved to their town. I was actually Judge David Harrison, a respected federal judge who had taken a temporary leave from the bench. 6 months earlier, I had been involved in a high-profile case involving organized crime. My life had been threatened, and federal marshals recommended that my family and I go into protective custody until the threats were resolved. Instead of hiding in a safe house, I chose to take a temporary new identity and move to a small town where nobody knew me. I got a job as an accountant using my real skills but a fake name. Sarah knew the truth, but we decided to keep it secret until the danger passed. I had been planning to reveal my identity and return to my judge position after our baby was born, but now Sarah needed my help more than ever. As a federal judge, I had contacts throughout the legal system. I knew how to spot corruption and false evidence. Most importantly, I had the authority to intervene in cases involving civil rights violations and judicial misconduct. But I couldn't reveal who I was too early. I needed to gather evidence of the corruption first. If I showed my hand too soon, the corrupt officials might destroy evidence or find ways to cover up their crimes. So I watched and waited, documenting every illegal thing they did while preparing to save my wife when the moment was right. While Sarah sat in jail, I secretly investigated the people trying to frame her. What I found made me sick with anger. Chief Bradley had received $50,000 from Karen Miller to arrest Sarah and build a case against her. The money came from Robert Miller's life insurance policy, which Karen had inherited. Dr. Stevens, the corrupt medical examiner, had been paid $25,000 to lie about the cause of death. He had a history of taking bribes and had been under investigation in his home county. DA Ross knew the evidence was fake, but he didn't care. He wanted to win his election and was willing to send an innocent pregnant woman to death row to do it. The worst part was Judge Patricia Coleman, who was assigned to Sarah's case. She was supposed to be impartial, but she was having secret meetings with the prosecutor to plan how to convict Sarah. She had already decided Sarah was guilty before the trial even started. I recorded phone conversations, took photographs of secret meetings, and gathered financial records showing the bribes. I had enough evidence to destroy all of them, but I needed to wait until the trial to reveal it all at once. Meanwhile, Sarah's health was getting worse in jail. The stress and poor conditions were affecting her pregnancy. The jail doctor said she might lose the baby if she didn't get better medical care soon. I filed motions to get Sarah better treatment, but Judge Coleman denied every request. She seemed to enjoy making Sarah suffer. "Your wife is a dangerous criminal," Judge Coleman told me during one hearing. "She'll get the same treatment as any other murder defendant." That night, I made my decision. I couldn't wait any longer. It was time to reveal who I really was and save my family. The trial started on a cold Monday morning in December. The courtroom was packed with people who wanted to see Sarah convicted. Karen Miller sat in the front row with her supporters, all wearing buttons with Robert's picture and the words "Justice for Robert." Sarah looked pale and tired as they brought her in. She was 7 months pregnant now, and her belly was clearly visible. But instead of sympathy, the crowd looked at her with hatred. Judge Coleman entered the courtroom with a satisfied smile. She thought this would be an easy conviction that would make her look tough on crime. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," D.A. Ross said in his opening statement, "the defendant Sarah Johnson is a cold-blooded killer who used her position as a nurse to murder an innocent man. She injected him with a fatal dose of medication and watched him die. She deserves the ultimate punishment for this heinous crime." The crowd behind Karen nodded and whispered their agreement. Several jurors looked convinced before they had even heard the evidence. Sarah's lawyer, Jim Peterson, gave a weak defense opening. "My client made an honest mistake," he said. "She never intended to harm anyone. I wanted to scream." He was basically admitting Sarah was guilty of something, just arguing it wasn't intentional murder. This was exactly what the prosecution wanted to hear. As the trial continued over the next few days, I watched the prosecution present their fake evidence. Dr. Stevens lied under oath about the medical examination. Chief Bradley lied about the investigation. Even some of the hospital staff had been pressured to change their stories. The defense did almost nothing to fight back. Jim Peterson barely cross-examined the witnesses and failed to present evidence that would have helped Sarah. By Thursday, things looked hopeless. The jury seemed ready to convict, and Judge Coleman was clearly biased against Sarah. Several jurors were nodding along with the prosecution's arguments. That's when Karen Miller made her big mistake. On Friday morning, Judge Coleman allowed victim impact statements before the closing arguments. This gave Karen Miller the chance to address the court and demand justice for her brother. Karen stood up in the front row, her face red with anger. She pointed at Sarah and began shouting, "That woman sitting there is evil," Karen yelled. "She killed my brother in cold blood, and she's been sitting there acting innocent while carrying her baby. She doesn't deserve to live." The crowd behind her started cheering and shouting agreement. "She needs to pay with her life," Karen continued. "I demand the death penalty. Nothing less will bring justice for Robert. She should be executed and her baby should be taken away from her." Now Karen crossed the line. She wasn't just attacking Sarah anymore. She was threatening our unborn child. "That baby doesn't deserve to have a murderer for a mother," Karen screamed. "The state should take that child and put this killer to death." Judge Coleman should have stopped Karen's outburst, but she just sat there smiling. She was enjoying watching Sarah suffer. That's when I knew it was time to act. I stood up in the back of the courtroom and walked toward the front. People turned to look at me, wondering who I was and what I was doing. "Your Honor," I said in a loud, clear voice, "I need to address the court." Judge Coleman looked annoyed. "Sir, this is not the time for spectators to speak. Please sit down or leave." "I'm not a spectator, Your Honor," I replied. "I'm Judge David Harrison of the Federal District Court, and I need to speak about the massive corruption and civil rights violations occurring in this courtroom." The entire courtroom went silent. Karen Miller's mouth dropped open. Judge Coleman turned white as a sheet. The shock in the courtroom was total. Nobody had expected this quiet accountant to reveal himself as a federal judge. Reporters started frantically taking notes and pictures. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced to the packed courtroom, "my name is Judge David Harrison. I have been living under protective custody in this town for the past 6 months. The defendant, Sarah Johnson, is my wife, and she is completely innocent of these charges." Karen Miller collapsed back into her seat, her face pale with shock. Judge Coleman was gripping her gavel so tightly her knuckles were white. "Furthermore," I continued, "I have spent the last 3 months investigating the massive corruption behind my wife's false charges. What I have discovered is a conspiracy involving bribery, perjury, evidence tampering, and judicial misconduct." I pulled out a thick folder of documents and photographs. "I have evidence that Chief Bradley received $50,000 from Karen Miller to fabricate evidence against my wife. I have recordings of Dr. Stevens admitting he lied about the medical examination in exchange for $25,000. The courtroom erupted in gasps and shocked whispers. Several jurors leaned forward with wide eyes. I also have evidence that District Attorney Ross knew the evidence was fabricated, but proceeded anyway to advance his political career. Most shocking of all, I have recordings and photographs proving that Judge Coleman has been meeting secretly with the prosecution to plan my wife's conviction." Judge Coleman stood up, her face red with anger and fear. "This is outrageous. You have no authority in my courtroom." "Actually, I do," I replied calmly. "As a federal judge, I have the authority to intervene in cases involving civil rights violations and judicial misconduct. This case involves both. I turned to address the jury directly. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my wife is innocent. She followed all proper medical procedures trying to save Robert Miller's life. The evidence against her has been completely fabricated by corrupt officials who were paid to frame her. Karen Miller finally found her voice. "This is impossible," she shouted. "You're lying! You're just making this up to save your wife." I looked directly at Karen with cold eyes. "Mrs. Miller, you paid $50,000 in bribe money to frame my innocent pregnant wife for a crime she didn't commit. You have demanded the death penalty for a woman whose only crime was trying to save your brother's life. You have threatened to separate my unborn child from its mother." The crowd that had been supporting Karen was now murmuring and looking at her with suspicion. The mood in the courtroom was shifting rapidly. "Your Honor," I said to Judge Coleman, "I am filing federal charges against everyone involved in this conspiracy. I am also requesting that all charges against my wife be immediately dismissed due to prosecutorial misconduct and evidence tampering." Judge Coleman was trapped. She knew that if a federal judge was making these accusations in open court, he had the evidence to back them up. I opened my folder and began presenting the evidence I had gathered over the past 3 months. First, here are bank records showing the $50,000 payment from Karen Miller to Chief Bradley's personal account, made just 2 days after my wife was arrested. I held up the documents so the jury and spectators could see them. Several jurors gasped at the clear evidence of bribery. Second, here is a recorded phone conversation between Dr. Stevens and an intermediary discussing his payment for falsifying the medical examination. I played a short clip of the recording on a small device. Dr. Stevens' voice was clearly heard saying, "I'll say whatever they want me to say about the cause of death, as long as the money is deposited in my account first." The courtroom erupted in angry murmurs. Even Karen's supporters were looking shocked and confused. Third, I continued, here are photographs and recordings of secret meetings between Judge Coleman and District Attorney Ross, where they discussed how to ensure my wife's conviction regardless of the evidence. I showed photographs of Judge Coleman and DA Ross meeting at a restaurant, clearly conspiring together. The jury looked horrified that their judge had been working with the prosecution. Finally, I said, here is the real medical evidence that was suppressed. 3 independent medical experts have reviewed Robert Miller's case and concluded that his death was unavoidable, given the severity of his injuries. My wife followed all proper procedures and did everything possible to save his life. I handed the medical reports to the court clerk. These experts are prepared to testify that the medical examiner's report was completely false and scientifically impossible. By now, the entire atmosphere in the courtroom had changed. The jury was looking at Sarah with sympathy instead of hatred. The crowd was murmuring angrily about the corruption they had just learned about. Karen Miller looked devastated. Her supporters were moving away from her, realizing they had been lied to and manipulated. Judge Coleman knew she was finished. With a federal judge presenting evidence of her corruption in open court, her career was over and she faced serious criminal charges. I need to call for a recess," she said weakly. "No, Your Honor," I replied firmly. "We're going to finish this right now. My pregnant wife has been sitting in jail for 3 months based on fabricated evidence and corrupt officials. This ends today." I turned to address the jury one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, my wife is innocent. She is a dedicated nurse who has spent her career saving lives, not taking them. She has been the victim of a terrible conspiracy by people who were willing to send an innocent pregnant woman to death row for money and political gain." I looked at Sarah, who was crying tears of relief as she realized her nightmare was finally ending. "Robert Miller's death was a tragedy," I continued, "but the real tragedy would be executing an innocent woman while the people who framed her walk free. I ask you to do what this corrupt system has refused to do: deliver justice." The jury didn't even need to deliberate. The foreman stood up immediately. "Your Honor, in light of this evidence of corruption and false testimony, we cannot in good conscience continue with this trial. We believe the defendant is innocent and the charges should be dismissed." The courtroom exploded in noise. Some people were cheering, others were arguing, and reporters were running to file their stories. Judge Coleman had no choice. "The charges against Sarah Johnson are hereby dismissed," she said quietly. Sarah collapsed in her chair, sobbing with relief. Finally, after 3 months of hell, she was free. But I wasn't done yet. Within hours of my revelation in the courtroom, federal agents were arresting the corrupt officials. Chief Bradley, Dr. Stevens, D.A. Ross, and Judge Coleman were all taken into custody on charges of conspiracy, bribery, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations. Karen Miller was arrested for bribery and conspiracy to commit murder. Her attempt to have an innocent pregnant woman executed had backfired completely. The local media, which had spent months calling Sarah a killer, now had to report the truth about the massive corruption in their town's justice system. Sarah was finally released from jail that evening. I held her tight as we walked out of the courthouse, her hand on her pregnant belly. "Is it really over?" she whispered. "It's over," I promised her. "We're going home." The townspeople who had hated Sarah now looked at her with shame and sympathy. Many apologized for believing the lies they had been told. Mrs. Peterson, our elderly neighbor, came up to Sarah with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, dear," she said. "We should have known you could never hurt anyone." "Can you ever forgive us?" Sarah, with her kind heart, forgave them all. "You were lied to," she said. "I don't blame any of you for believing what you were told." Over the next year, I presided over the federal trials of the corrupt officials from my regular courtroom in the federal courthouse. It felt good to be back in my judge's robes, delivering real justice instead of watching it be perverted. Chief Bradley received 15 years in federal prison for bribery and conspiracy. Dr. Stevens got 10 years for perjury and evidence tampering. D.A. Ross was sentenced to 12 years and was disbarred from practicing law. Judge Coleman received the harshest sentence, 20 years for judicial corruption and civil rights violations. She had betrayed the most sacred trust in our justice system. Karen Miller pleaded guilty to conspiracy and bribery charges. She received 8 years in prison and had to pay back all the money she had stolen from her brother's life insurance to fund her scheme. During her sentencing, Karen finally showed some remorse. "I was wrong," she said, crying in front of the court. "I was so angry about losing my brother that I wanted someone to blame. But Sarah Johnson was innocent and I tried to have her killed for something she didn't do. I'm sorry. It was too little too late, but at least she finally admitted the truth." Sarah and I decided to stay in Cedar Falls after everything was resolved. Despite the terrible experience, we had grown to love the small town and its people. Most importantly, the townspeople had learned an important lesson about rushing to judgment and believing lies. Our daughter, Emma, was born 3 months after Sarah's release. She was healthy and beautiful, with Sarah's kind eyes and my stubborn chin. Holding her in the hospital where Sarah had been falsely accused felt like the ultimate victory. The same hospital staff who had been pressured to lie against Sarah now treated her like a hero. They offered her a job as head nurse, which she accepted after taking time off for maternity leave. "Are you sure you want to work here again?" I asked her. "After everything they put you through?" "This is where I belong," Sarah replied, holding baby Emma. "I became a nurse to help people, and that's what I'm going to keep doing. I won't let what happened change who I am." The new police chief, Captain Martinez, was an honest cop who had been brought in to clean up the department. He personally apologized to Sarah and asked for her help in rebuilding trust between the police and the community. Our experience taught the people of Cedar Falls some important lessons about justice, corruption, and the danger of rushing to judgment. The local newspaper, under new ownership, ran a series of articles about how to spot corruption and protect innocent people from false accusations. They started a scholarship fund in Sarah's name for nursing students. The hospital created new procedures to protect medical staff from false accusations and ensure that grieving families receive proper counseling instead of looking for someone to blame. Most importantly, the community learned to question authority when something doesn't seem right, and to remember that accused people are innocent until proven guilty. As for me, I returned to my position as a federal judge with a renewed commitment to protecting civil rights and fighting corruption. My experience watching my innocent wife face death row gave me a deeper understanding of how easily justice can be perverted when good people stay silent. Today, Emma is 4 years old and Sarah is pregnant with our second child. We live in the same house where people once threw eggs and spray-painted "killer" on our door. Now our neighbors bring us cookies and babysit Emma when we need help. Sarah is beloved at the hospital, where she has implemented new programs to support families of critically injured patients. She makes sure no family goes through what we experienced, being blamed for tragedies that are beyond anyone's control. I still serve as a federal judge, and I often speak to law students about the importance of integrity in the justice system. I tell them about Sarah's case and how corruption almost sent an innocent pregnant woman to death row. Justice isn't just about following the law, I tell them. It's about having the courage to stand up when the law is being perverted by corrupt people who put their own interests above the truth. Karen Miller was released from prison last year after serving her sentence. She wrote a letter to Sarah apologizing again and asking for forgiveness. Sarah wrote back, telling Karen that she forgave her and hoped she would find peace. That's the kind of person Sarah is. Even after someone tried to have her executed, she still has room in her heart for forgiveness. Looking back on that terrible time, I realize that sometimes the worst experiences can teach us the most important lessons. We learned that corruption can happen anywhere, even in small towns where everyone thinks they know each other. We learned that people will believe lies when they're angry and looking for someone to blame. Most importantly, we learned that the truth always comes out eventually, and that good people will stand up for what's right when they know the facts. Karen Miller demanded the death penalty for my pregnant wife based on lies and corruption. She thought she could destroy an innocent family to satisfy her need for revenge. She didn't know who she was dealing with. When I revealed my identity in that courtroom, I didn't just save my wife and child. I exposed a network of corruption that had been poisoning justice in Cedar Falls for years. Today, our town is better because we faced the truth about what happened. Sarah is stronger because she survived false accusations with her integrity intact. And I'm a better judge because I understand how precious and fragile justice really is. Karen Miller tried to use the legal system as a weapon against innocent people. Instead, she learned that real justice will always triumph over corruption, lies, and revenge. The truth set us free, and it changed our community forever.